Hey everyone, welcome to Hit the Apex podcast. It's Jawad here as always. Thank you for joining me this week after the Dutch Grand Prix. I am recording this on a Tuesday afternoon, even though it will go to air or get published on the usual Thursday. So if anything happens between now and then it's going to look a bit funny. But just giving you the heads up and the warning there that this is the case this week. Just scheduling and logistics and life stuff kind of made it so that I would be able to record today instead. So yeah, I hope everyone's well. Another weekend of F1 racing. We're in the middle of a triple header which finishes off this weekend in Monza, but a lot to talk about from Zandvoort, and not, at least the drama with the flares that we had during qualifying. I'm glad we didn't see any on the race, during the race actually, because they did have to red flag part of qualifying because there was a flare thrown on track. So that's a bit silly, and I know it's hard to stop people from doing this sort of thing, but I guess they have to just come up with like event organisers and security have to come up with better ways to police it, because not to sound like a party pooper or anything, it is quite dangerous, and it's there's a reason why they're trying to outlaw it, but I feel like they could do a better job as well, particularly with searching at the gates. I don't know if they do what they do here with not that flares are metal or anything, but often people get randomly stopped and searched at the gates if you go to the footy or the cricket. Here I know they're a bit more lax when it comes to F1 and racing events in general. They just check your bag, that's it. But, people can strap them to their legs or other parts and whatnot. So, But anyway, we'll try not to talk too much about flares and all that sort of jazz, because there's other jazz to talk about. Again, the tinfoil hats have gone on, conspiracy theories about how this race unfolded. I'll talk a bit about that a bit later. But first, another majestic performance from Max Verstappen. He outfoxed his rivals on the track and in the pits as well to win the Dutch Grand Prix from pole. And, while that's the result, he won the race from pole position. It all seems like it was, bound to happen, and, it's a walk in the park for him. It was quite intriguing how the race unfolded, because you had Mercedes, who for the first time this season really threatened for the win. They were quick on the hard tyres. They were on a one-stop strategy. Toto Wolff, before the race, when he met with it, did their team meeting, said that, we're going to take risks today, we're going to gamble. And unfortunately, it didn't pay off, but you do have to commend them for being in that position to be able to threaten for the win. So, I feel like they are still going to win a race this season, but it wasn't going to be here this afternoon with the way things unfolded. Let's wind the clock back, though, to qualifying. So, Verstappen on pole, but by the smallest margin all season. It was like 0.02 of a second, 0.021 was the gap between him and Charles Leclerc in Q3. Leclerc had set the benchmark time. Max had gone out. Leclerc then went out again on the final runs and bettered that time. He was a bit off in the middle sector, and that's where Max made up the time to get that gap that he needed. So that was very close and very exciting between them. I think, there was expectation that Ferrari should do well around this track, particularly in qualifying trim, as they have done all season, given that there's less emphasis on power, more so on the downforce and the slow speed corners and stuff. Not really slow speed corners, but a lot more corners to negotiate than straights. And then there was also bit of intrigue around Hamilton, because apparently he was on for a quick lap too at the end before we had Sergio Perez crash at the final corner. Whether that was orchestrated too, if you got your tinfoil hat, sure. I think there's no malice in it at all. I mean, he did it back in Monaco to protect his own pole position, if you want to call it even that. So yeah, the fact that a Red Bull driver does it or whatever, or a driver that's not a Mercedes does it, it's suddenly, a crime against humanity. So while I don't have the figures available, and I said this after qualifying when I did the qualifying review for Grid Talk, Hamilton apparently had the fastest first sector or was on a personal best first sector, so he could have been on for at least a front row start. And he hasn't started in the top three all season in qualifying, so that's a stat that will probably be bugging him a little bit. But still fourth was pretty good, and considering he was leading a bit of the race as well, they weren't too far off. But again, they might lament the fact that because they didn't start at the front of the grid, from P1 or at least on the front row of the grid, that it cost him in the end. So Max and the Ferraris, they start on the soft tyres. They're on a different strategy to Mercedes, who are on the mediums behind them. Soft tyre runners had to come in relatively early-ish. So we saw Max in on lap 19 in response to Leclerc's stop. Further down the grid, we have the first driver onto the hard tyres. I think Fernando Alonso was the one. He showed some good pace, and Pirelli brought their hardest range of tyres too. So, people throughout the season have been complaining about the hard tyre, even though it's kind of in the middle of the range when it was in those races. This is the race where they had the hardest three compounds, and the hard tyres is meant to be like a brick, but they did quite well on this particular track and whatnot. So he was showing some good pace on the hard compound. Lando Norris as well, racing inside the top 10, did the same thing, basically trying to beat the Alpines, do the same strategy as them, which didn't end up eventuating, but he still scored some good points, did Lando. This brought a lot of intrigue with it to the likes of Mercedes, who would have been studying the data and the numbers, the data, and thus were able to pit their guys halfway through or just before halfway through the race to get onto the hard tyre. So they were able to then overhaul Checo, get in behind Charles Leclerc as well, and basically they're in a good position at that point because they knew the two guys ahead of them, Verstappen and Leclerc, would have to pit a second time, given that the fact that they had committed to two-stop strategies, starting on the soft tyre and then having changed to the mediums, and the mediums weren't going to get them all the way to the end of the race, given how early they were in. So they knew Mercedes that Max would come out behind them, and they would have to be passed for the Red Bull to be able to win. Though such was Max's pace, I've got to say, through the race, that it wasn't really, or it should not have been really doubted that he could actually do it. I know Zandvoort's not the best track for overtaking, and we didn't see quite a lot of overtaking, even with that extended DRS zone down the pit straight. The way Verstappen kind of reeled in Hamilton after the safety car restart showed, there was no stopping him regardless of tyre compound and whatnot. So that was an intriguing part of the race. Sadly, we didn't actually see it unfold that way because we had a virtual safety car out on lap 48 for a bizarre stoppage by Yuki Tsunoda. So this is where you got to hold on to your horses and buckle up for the ride. Of course, this is just I'm going to state what happened and then give you my interpretation of it. So don't go sharpening those pitchforks just yet. So Tsunoda had a pit stop. He came out, thought that there was a problem with the rear. Maybe the rear tyres weren't on, or he was talking about a differential. He pulled over to the side of the track, loosened his belts as well, thinking that he was out of the race, but then was able to get going and return to the pits. It was a long second stop in that instance. AlphaTauri basically not diagnosing the error properly. They couldn't see it on their data and whatnot, so they basically tightened his seatbelts, sent him back out on different tyres, and then basically not even exiting the pits, they started telling him you got to find somewhere to stop on the track, to the side. So it was basically an error from AlphaTauri with their interpretation and not being able to diagnose the problem properly, that led to this all happening. And basically just the timing of that was ill to Mercedes. It was ill-suited, or, basically stuffed their race, because what had happened, it got Verstappen the crucial time that he needed to make that second pit stop to switch over to the hard tyres. Mercedes decided as well, let's, use this opportunity to cover and get onto another set of medium tyres to be able to have extra grip. At least they'll be a bit more competitive than Verstappen on the hard tyres on fresh set of mediums. But what kind of unfolded after that, post-race and everything, was absolutely disgusting to see, again, abuse being hurled towards, certain parties. So in this case, there was Yuki Tsunoda, then also the chief strategist for Red Bull in Hannah Schmitz, who, there's people out there who are applauding her for, making the right decisions on the day and, making the right calls with getting Max in later as well for another set of soft tyres. But then there's people who want to dig into her and lay blame for, she was cackling away on the pit wall, as it was seen in the TV images when the virtual safety car came out, because it meant that they could pit, they could pit Verstappen, but also it was the Red Bull sister team that had caused this. Was there some kind of agreement, or, they had, Christian Horner had tapped them on the shoulder, can you please retire one of your cars and trigger a safety car kind of thing? Like, come on, are we that, I know people are still traumatized and whatnot after Abu Dhabi, but get over it. That's all done and dusted now, and this was just a situation that was poorly handled by AlphaTauri for not doing it properly, and just, they happen to be Red Bull's sister team, so, there's no reason and logic in proportioning blame in the respect of, the fact that they conspired to make this happen. So, yeah, that is totally not on. And, I'm talking about the flares before being poor form and poor behaviour. What goes on social media is just as poor. I've never seen F1 social media this toxic and poor in all the time, since social media became a part of Formula One, or people started jumping on Twitter and whatnot. Before F1 fully embraced social media, that it's just been horrible. It is a cesspool. It's like, dealing with incels that are on, websites such as 4chan and whatnot, basically either looking for trouble or, trying to troll somebody. It's just not on. And especially when you're abusing someone, using hurtful comments against someone else's work, who don't even have a way to come back and have their opinion heard, because they're trying to be professional, whereas people who just want to click away and, start sending out these hurtful messages don't even think professionally or whatever. So it's very hurtful to see, and it's very disgusting. And, I'm not saying it because I'm a Max Verstappen fan or a Red Bull fan or anything like that. I'm not any of that. I'm not a fan of either. So back off. And it's just, again, I know I've got a friend, I've got people who tell me just to not look at the comments, but it must be called out, this sort of behaviour, I think. So yeah, that was a bit sad. But going back to the race, Max got the pit stop he needed. Mercedes were on the medium tyres. And this basically put Max back in the lead. But then we had a full safety car come out on lap 55 because Valtteri Bottas grind to a halt on the main straight next to the pit lane. And sad for Bottas because it was two retirements on the trot. So after the opening laps, the opening lap incident, or lap 2 incident with Nicholas Latifi in Spa. So this brought out the safety car that had to recover the Alfa Romeo from the straight. But we saw Verstappen then come in for a fresh set of soft tyres, because he's like, why not, and that's the call that the strategist made that was, spot on, because originally they wanted to go long enough in that middle stint to be able to put on the soft tyre at the end. So if they had to overhaul and pass the Mercedes, they would have the best available tyre to be able to do so. But in this instance, they got the second opportunity to do that, even though they were on the hard tyre after the virtual safety car. They got the second opportunity to do that. They put him on the soft tyre, it did give track position back to Hamilton and to Russell initially, but then we saw Russell demanding to come in to change to the soft tyre as well. Then this was a call again that you got to give praise to Russell for thinking on his feet, because he's like, okay, let's do this. Let's get off the medium tyre because that's going to leave us exposed. Let's get on the soft tyre. And basically this left Hamilton in the lead on medium tyres, furious that, the team didn't suggest that he do the same thing. But then also, why didn't he think of it too? Hamilton said on the radio, was giving all sorts of grief to the team, said that they screwed him over. And it was all in the heat of the moment. He did apologise afterwards, so no point having to go at Hamilton for that. But I think in that situation, he was unlucky, but also didn't think of, didn't react the same way Russell did to come in for those soft tyres. So basically Max on the quicker tyres behind Hamilton had to wait for the safety car restart. He got the good run out of the final corner and basically said goodbye to the Mercedes. And apparently Hamilton might have been in the wrong mode as well, or flicked a switch on his steering wheel that meant that he didn't have the ERS charge or something that he could have used to defend. So that basically was sayonara to Max, and then also sayonara to Hamilton on the podium, because Russell on the soft tyres was much quicker. He got a bit too close to Hamilton before the pass. I don't know what was that about between the teammates. Thought they were going to crash there for a second, but luckily they didn't down the straight. Russell in for a podium, and then of course Leclerc coming in to relegate him off the podium altogether. So it was fourth in the end for Hamilton. Leclerc back on the podium for the first time in, I think, since Austria. But yeah, this is where the whole conspiracy theory and, again, the fact that it was Hamilton that lost a victory or whatever. People are getting flashbacks to Abu Dhabi. It doesn't add up in this instance. There was nothing untoward. It was just a series of events that were unfortunate. Unfortunate series of events. Or series of unfortunate events. That's the series of books that enjoyed reading as a youngster, so I'm sure you've all heard of it. Check it out if not. But yeah, there's nothing, you can't really proportion blame to anyone. Like, I'm just saying in hindsight, maybe Hamilton should have thought of the soft tyres himself, but you look at his season so far, and as amazing as it's been with the podiums and whatnot, there have been instances earlier in the year where he lost good results because of, say, the timing of safety cars and whatnot. You look at Australia, where he was furious because Russell got to benefit from a safety car, or a virtual safety car as it was, and got out on quicker tyres than he did. But we don't say that was a conspiracy theory, do we? So it's just the fact that Red Bull are involved again. Mercedes are involved, that people have got to blow up on the internet and have to make their opinion heard in a way that is hurtful to others. Behind them, Carlos Sainz had a horrible race, and you've got to feel sorry for poor Carlos Sainz here, because most of the problems were not even from him directly. It was the team. Ferrari had to just come in and stuff up strategy again and stuff up the pit stops again. It wouldn't be a race if Ferrari didn't do that. The first stop that he made was bungled because one of the rear tyres, I think the rear left tyre, wasn't even ready for them. They had the wheel guns sitting in the middle of the pit lane or in the path of Red Bull when they came out. So Perez actually hit the rattle gun, I think it was. So that, should warrant some kind of financial penalty for Ferrari for being sloppy in that instance. Sainz lost a whole bunch of time, and also the track position to Checo, because he was, ahead of Perez at this point, but wasn't in that instance. Then he made a pass under a yellow flag on Esteban Ocon, I think. as well, or I don't think he did, and somehow they managed to avoid getting a penalty for that, because I think he might have handed that position back, but he did get a 5-second time penalty for another unsafe release during the safety car, and he was released into the path of one of the Alpines. I think it was Ocon in that instance, or Alonso, so Sainz having good fun with his former team, getting involved with both cars in different instances. So that 5-second time penalty dropped him from 6th to 8th, or 5th to 8th, I think, at the end of the day. So not a good day for him. So Checo coming in 5th, Fernando Alonso, who qualified 13th, finishing 6th. With that hard tyre strategy that I mentioned earlier, and Ocon too, starting from outside the top 10, finishing 9th. Lando in P7. It was a good race for him. It just, the fact that he started in the top 10, but just couldn't keep up with the race pace of Alonso, meant that, he did the best thing he could again. Flying the flag for McLaren with one hand tied behind his back, or McLaren flying the flag with one hand tied behind their back, with Daniel Ricciardo not in the points and down in P17, finishing only ahead of Nicholas Latifi, who was a lap down, is just, it is painful, and I'm so sorry that it hurt. Like, it hurts me to see this. That's the thing, people are like, using big words of like betrayed and that, and I know the F1 direction or whatever during the broadcast said something like still struggling on the screen. That was a bit unprofessional and a bit silly from them, but that's the thing, like, is his form just continuing to slump because he's got no confidence and he knows that he's not going to be with the team next year? Or is this just basically a continuation of what his season's been like, or his entire McLaren tenure been like? So it's, there's no point in speculating and debating about it, because we know that the deed is done and he won't be there next year. But it's just sad to see him, whimpering around at the rear of the grid and not being able to have an impact in the race and be fighting with guys like we know that he's used to fighting really well within the midfield and towards the front of the grid. So not a very good race for him again. Lance Stroll came home, picked up the final point, so good for him and Aston Martin. Not really much to say about that, but they were strong during the weekend. They were quick in practice. They were up there in the top 10, so, a track like this suiting them, and all the Mercedes-powered cars, I think, were doing quite well. So Alex Albon down there in 12th too, so not too far off the points. Pierre Gasly qualified 11th, finished 11th. Biggest news about him over the weekend was, his strong links to Alpine, so he could be the person who replaces Fernando Alonso next year. Whether he's going to get on with Esteban Ocon or not remains to be seen, because they've got history between those two, as we've said previously. But at the end of the day, the team are going to demand a level of professionalism and, a stern approach. And professionalism has been the word of the day so far. So, they can't really be going and causing trouble amongst them too. So, it's not really a Senna Prost type situation where they're fighting for the championship. They'll be fighting for 4th or something in the Constructors' Championship next year, unless someone else gets the step up on them. But wait and see how that one unfolds, because there's more to come from that too. So that pretty much sums up the Dutch Grand Prix, the visit to Zandvoort. More points for Max, of course, 109 points he's leading the championship by. So, do your math. I'm sure either by Singapore or Suzuka we could see this whole thing wrapped up if he continues to drive the way he's been driving. I pointed out last week and, maintained that we could see him potentially break Sebastian Vettel's record of biggest points difference between first and second in the championship, which is 155, which was set back in 2013. But it all depends on how the drivers behind them fare, because I don't really see anyone at the moment, bar Mercedes potentially, getting the upset win. Ferrari just don't seem to be in it in the races. Sergio Perez struggling with a car at the moment, but still got a decent result. He's tied on points now with Leclerc, but I'm sure he can still improve Checo. So yeah, it's really Mercedes who I think can get the upset win at some point this season. Whether it's a Singapore or Brazil even. Brazil was one that I've said all along that we could probably see Hamilton win at, like he did last year, which was a spectacular race and spectacular drive from him in the sprint and also in the actual Grand Prix. So yeah, we'll see how that all unfolds. We'll talk about Monza anyway in a little bit. I want to do the resolution part of this episode, and that's the CRB ruling, the Contract Recognition Board, coming to a verdict just ahead of qualifying, I think, or second practice on the Friday. And their verdict was that only McLaren had a valid contract with Oscar Piastri, which was signed on the 4th of July for the seasons 2023 and 2024. So before we get into the date and stuff that it was signed, it just shows, or it just brings further embarrassment to Alpine, of course, their mismanagement of the whole situation, and then also how, I don't even know the word to describe it, but the confidence that we had from the team boss at Otmar Safnauer just seems so silly, given the fact that they had no contract. McLaren had a watertight deal. It was all there. There was no, agreements or handshake things. It was all written out clearly and whatnot, whereas Alpine just, I don't know what they had with him. I think it was some kind of document that they had to present for the Concord Agreement that had Oscar Piastri's name on it, given the fact that he was going to be the reserve and test driver for this season, and that was not presented as a contract. So, at the end of the day, the Piastri camp was in the right. They did the right thing for their driver. All that remains to be seen, given how he fares next year, and I'll get to that in a second. But Alpine just totally messed the whole situation, and they've lost not only Piastri, one of their star juniors who they've spent so much money on this season just doing the testing programs and whatnot, but also the extra cost of the legal fees that they've got to now pay as well to bring McLaren into the CRB and whatnot, and then to lose the ruling. But then also they've lost Fernando Alonso, so they've got to find another driver for next year. And, if it's going to be Pierre Gasly, then good for him. But, with that, we'll be talking about this time next year, if it is Gasly and Ocon, whether the two fall out and everything. Is there going to be problems? They'll be like, they weren't supposed to be teammates in the first place because of this and because of that. It's like, well, that kind of just goes back on the team, doesn't it? It's the team's fault for getting themselves into this situation in the first place. So, that's basically where we have to leave that. Talking about the date the contract was signed, of course, so that definitely was one of the surprising revelations of the whole CRB statement, was the fact that Piastri signed this deal on the 4th of July, just after the British Grand Prix weekend, but crucially, it was at a time where Daniel Ricciardo, a week later on the 13th or whatever, put out a statement on Instagram which was very heartfelt and whatnot about him being committed to seeing out his deal at McLaren in 2023. So, what was the point of, leading him on if they knew that he wasn't going to be there next year? I don't know, whether it was some kind of deal that they signed where they would just bring Piastri into the McLaren camp for next year and then just hope that everything else worked out or whatever. Who knows? But I'm not going to go as far as saying that, there's betrayal, there's backstabbing and drama and all that sort of thing, because Formula One is all about that, unfortunately. It is ruthless as a business, and for Ricciardo, the writing was on the wall. If he couldn't improve, which, he hasn't still, he still hasn't, which is sad. that there was no other direction that they could go in other than their separate ways. So we'll leave it at that. People are still going to be upset. You know, the I don't even know whether to call them hardcore fans, because they just always want to see drama and whatnot. So, you know, and I'm a big fan of Ricciardo too, but unfortunately it's not worked out. So we've just got to cut our losses and look forward to what comes next. There was a moment where he was overheard talking about his future with Checo, and then he saw a camera and then stopped talking, but said something along the lines of take a year off and come back in 24. Does that mean, you know, this reserve driver gig at Mercedes could come about, and then if Hamilton retires at the end of next year, we get Ricciardo and a Mercedes in 2024? Wouldn't that be a treat? You know, that would be worth taking a year off for, I think. So let's not all get too carried away and hateful at each other for, you know, not supporting him, or, you know, F1 betrayed him, McLaren betrayed him. Plus, you know, again, the whole toxic attitude towards McLaren, that's totally unwarranted. You know, you're not really a fan of the team or anything if you're giving them abuse like that. So, yeah, gotta stick by them if you're a fan. Otherwise, just stop, you know, with these toxic opinions that keep coming out and upsetting other people. Anyway, Oscar. It's going to be a baptism of fire for Oscar, though, next year. And this is where what I'm focusing on is whether the gamble for McLaren and the gamble from the Piastri camp to jump out of where they're comfortable at Alpine to go over to McLaren is going to be worth the trouble that it's been, you know. And I feel like his class and his skills will show. And some points that I've made, I've been trying to write an article about this, which, you know, trying to sound different to what everyone else has been saying and focusing on is the fact that, you know, the way that he's shown himself in the junior formula, in Formula 3, Formula 2, all the things that he did before then, shows that he is on the same level as a George Russell and a Charles Leclerc, and even Lando Norris, who will be his teammate next year. You know, the qualifying gap between Ricciardo and Norris this year, you know, has been hovering around that, you know, half a second to over half a second. If, you know, he can close that, can Piastri close that next year, then that'll be good. That'll be a good start. But then also doing the work like Norris has to understand and adapt his driving style to this car. And not saying that Ricciardo hasn't done the work and whatnot, but he's done the work, but he still relies too much on his natural driving style, which I know we like that driving style. It's entertaining and it's really good in races, but with this car, you just have to try and give a little more, as Carlos Sainz did in 2019 and 2020, where he was brilliant with the team. And I'm going to say it again, yes, I miss having Sainz in McLaren because, you know, he and Lando were just such a good pairing. But also Lando as well this year. The car wasn't designed to suit Lando. This is a fact that people need to get or understand, is that it wasn't designed to suit Lando. It just was a very interestingly designed car with the out-of-date infrastructure and technology that they have at the, you know, McLaren Technology Centre, and it's not going to be till 2024 where they have that new wind tunnel and driver simulator that we're gonna see them back on par, hopefully, with the top teams. But in the meantime, they just have to focus on not hemorrhaging as many points as they have been in the last 2 years. I mean, last year they lost third in the Constructors' Championship because of the points that they lost due to one side of the garage not being quick enough or not being able to score. And then again, the same thing this year. They're going to lose fourth in the Constructors because of that. So that's the thing that needs to stop, or they can't have again next year. With Piastri, it is a big risk. You know, it is a big risk to have him come in and not be able to, if he doesn't perform, then there are going to be questions asked about it and whatnot. And the fact that he's coming into a new system, it's not as comfortable as where he's been at Alpine, having spent all that time embedded in the team. But this is the challenge that we want to see for the sake of the young driver succeed, but then also for the team as well, so that they've made the right decision by, going through this split with the established Ricciardo and then taking a risk on a young driver. So I hope that all makes sense, and that, when we get to next year, we can talk about the fact that, yes, this gamble was worth it for McLaren rather than it wasn't. So, yeah, I couldn't have made my point clearer, I think, in that instance. Rounding things off then, looking ahead to the Italian Grand Prix this weekend, and while we're on the subject of McLaren and Ricciardo, it is going to be the returning to the scene of that magnificent win last year, and I still, feel so happy when I think about that. That was such a good race, such a good day, not only for the team, but for Ricciardo as well. And, it's always going to be a moment that we all look at as being the highlights of the partnership. And it just makes me wish that there was more of it, and unfortunately there's not, so we have to move on from that. But we're never going to forget that. And that was Ricciardo at his best. And hopefully he will find his best again wherever he ends up in the future. So if only we could be treated to a result like that this weekend, like we did last year with the 1-2, Norris up there too. But unfortunately, Red Bull probably will be the favourites. The straights obviously favouring the RB18 quite a bit, so it wouldn't be surprising if we see a Max win on Sunday, but we do get some crazy races at Monza like we did in 2020 with Pierre Gasly winning and taking his first win ahead of Carlos Sainz. So McLaren have been on the podium 2 years in a row at Monza, so could we make it a third year? Wink, wink. Important as well, whilst talking about Max, that we look at the records too, because his win at Zandvoort was his 30th career win. He's now one off, equaling Nigel Mansell, the great Nigel Mansell, of course, and then 2 wins off Fernando Alonso's win tally too. So, within a couple of races, he could be ahead of those two. And then on his way to reaching the likes of Ayrton Senna, Alan Prost, and Sebastian Vettel. So, I don't think he could reach those guys in this particular season with the races that we've got left. But the fact that he's getting closer to them is just unheard of. And he's only 3 wins off reaching Vettel's record again from 2013 of 13 wins in a season. So, this is just incredible what we're seeing from Verstappen at the moment. So, going to stop talking good things, or not good things, but just going to stop talking about Verstappen now as we get to the end of this episode. But Ferrari, it's their homecoming. There's going to be more scrutiny on them this weekend, especially if there's going to be more failures like they've had all year with the pit stops and strategy and decision making and reliability, and if drivers make mistake too. Do they need changes within the team? There's no one that you can see screaming to you as being a candidate to replace Mattia Binotto as team principal. What I've sort of come to the conclusion of is that I feel Binotto is a bit too soft, and maybe the whole team is a bit soft. That's the thing, because there was unrest last time there was a hard personality in charge in the form of Maurizio Arrivabene, who did come down hard if, they made bad decisions and whatnot. Then that's basically what him got kicked out by the majority. They wanted someone like Binotto who would be more for the people, he'd be more for the workers and whatnot. But sometimes, rather than getting your ego massaged, you need to get a bit of a brutal wake-up call. And in this instance, wherever the problem is and however it is happening, I think Binotto needs to just be a bit harder. I think as well, it doesn't help the fact that the current bigwigs at Ferrari are not as present as much as, Sergio Marchionne was, or Luca Montezemolo. They were very much on the case of whoever the team principal was, or the team at large. Marchionne was a real hard character, as was De Montezemolo before he was forced to step down when Ferrari had its little reshuffle. So, John Elkann and Louis Camilleri, they are seen at races and whatnot, but we don't see that hard personality that we got from the predecessors. And not that that worked for, like, I don't know what will work for Ferrari. Seriously, they just need to work something out, because it's just not happening. And, you know, like I said earlier, I just can't see a situation where they'll win a race again this year. You know, Mercedes seem more favourites to me than to win a race if Red Bull doesn't on an occasion. So that's going to be a bitter pill for them to swallow, but who knows? They might come out and smash everyone for a 1-2, and then everything will be fine. Who knows? Potential news as well of Colton Herta from IndyCar being granted a super license. We could find that out as early as this weekend to get the AlphaTauri drive for next year with Pierre Gasly out. Helmut Marko saying that they're only considering Colton for that drive, so that might mean Mick Schumacher doesn't get the opportunity to jump across from Haas. Maybe Schumacher might not be on the grid next year. Who knows? I don't know. Again, Colton, bit of an erratic driver. Whether coming to Formula One might polish that up or whatever. It'll get, you know, F1 the American driver that they want on the grid and whatnot. So who knows? Like, I'm excited, you know, that we're going to get to see someone different, but just have to wait and see how it all pans out. While we're on IndyCar, though, you know, great job from Scott McLaughlin over the weekend, winning his third race of the season, and also being the only driver to have won from pole position, I think, this year too. So I wish he was a lot closer in the points to Will Power and Scott Dixon to be able to challenge for the championship heading into the last round. But, you know, anything can happen. He could still win. But I'm really happy to see how well McLaughlin's done in his second year in IndyCar. It means that, you know, the skill and the talent that he has is, you know, has been realised. You know, what Roger Penske saw here in the Supercars Championship has actually come to fruition over there in IndyCar, and IndyCar is such a tough championship, as we know. So well done to him, and I hope we are talking about him potentially, you know, if not this year, but next year, as being a hot title favourite, and that he could actually pull it off, which would be quite amazing. So yeah. Anyway, thanks so much for tuning in again this week. Remember to find us on the socials at Hit the Apex Media on the Twitter, and then there's also the Linktree to all the other links as well, relevant to me and this podcast. Until next week, when we come back to review the Italian Grand Prix, and also is Pogacar on this weekend as well. I have a feeling it is. Yes, it is race week in the Supercars Championship. We're heading across the ditch to Pogacar, the final race of Pogacar in Supercars. We look forward to it. So thank you very much, guys, and we'll see you next week.